Zealotes, thank you for your love and support. I appreciate you all. The most powerful religious leader in the world just did something that 266 popes before him refused to do for nearly 600 years. He apologized. Pope Leo XIV issued a historic apology for the Catholic Church's role in starting, justifying, and supporting the transatlantic slave trade. In his official document, he asked for pardon in the name of the Church. He called slavery a wound in Christian memory. But this is not just a story about a religious leader saying sorry. This is a massive story filled with hidden history, a mind-blowing family secret, and a shocking United Nations vote, and a deep warning about the future of technology. To truly understand why this apology is such a big deal, we have to look at what the church is actually apologizing for. Most people think the church was just watching from the sidelines, or that the individual priest just looked the other way. But the truth is much deeper. The Vatican actually signed the permission slip that started the African slave trade. It all goes back to a single piece of paper signed in Rome in the year 1452. At that time, Portugal was raiding the coastal line of West Africa. The very first enslaved Africans had arrived in Europe just 8 years earlier, in 1444, when 235 people were sold like cattle in the market in Portugal. The Portuguese king wanted to capture more people, but he wanted a spiritual blessing first. So he wrote to the Pope. On June 18, 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued an official decree called Dum Diversis. This was a papal bull, which meant it was not just a suggestion. In the 15th century, a papal bull carried the full weight of international law. In that document, the Pope gave the King of Portugal the official authority to invade, capture, and reduce all non-Christian peoples to perpetual servitude. That means slavery forever, authorized in the name of God. 3 years later, in 1455, the Pope issued a second document called Romanus Pontifice, giving Portugal exclusive right to land and trade along the West African coast. Together, these documents became the foundation for the doctrine of discovery, the legal and religious rule used to steal African and indigenous lands for the next 500 years. This was not a one-time mistake by one bad pope. Over the next 62 years, 4 different popes chose to renew and re-sign these exact same documents. It was official church policy, yet for 574 years, through the abolition of slavery, the civil rights movement, and the modern history, no pope ever stood up to admit that the institution of the Vatican did this until now. But here is the most incredible twist in this entire story. The part the mainstream media is barely mentioning. The man who just made these apologies, Pope Leo XIV, carries the blood of the very people those Vatican documents were used to enslave.
The Pope finally opens the grave of history. Africans, are you paying attention? Sit down on this one. Just this past Monday, the Pope Leo, acknowledged and apologized for the church's role in legitimizing slavery. Do you understand the size of that sentence? This is not a rumor, not bitterness. This is not someone hates Christianity. The institution, the Vatican itself, looked backward and acknowledged that the church was not merely silent when Africans were being chained, but he helped give moral cover Now, the question that should make every African Christian uncomfortable: if the same institution that helped legitimize your ancestors' enslavement also helped shape the religion that was handed to you, what exactly were you handed? A path to freedom, or a spiritual language designed to make suffering bearable? Because empires are not stupid. For some of you, I understand your brains are completely locked from reasoning, and the key is thrown away, but could you please try reason a little bit on this one? Oppressors do not hand the oppressed tools that make them dangerous. They hand them tools that make them manageable. They do not teach rebellion, they teach obedience. They do not teach ownership, they teach submission. They do not teach power, they teach patience. So, when Africa was being robbed of land, labor, names, minerals, gods, memory, and identity, why was the message not rise, organize, build, own, govern? Why was the message concentrated on obey, endure, forgive, wait, heaven's coming? Think, if someone's taking your earth and asking you to wait for heaven, that's not accidental, that's strategy. If someone's stealing your labor and teaching you humility, that's not innocent, that's management. If someone's breaking your body while promising peace to your soul, that's not salvation, that's psychological engineering. And this is where it even cuts the deepest. Many Africans now defend the very system that came with their humiliation more aggressively than they defend the memory of the very people who were humiliated. You fear questioning religion more than you fear what was done to your ancestors. You call African traditions demonic without investigation, but call foreign religious history secret without interrogation. You inherited the religion of men who questioned your humanity, then turned around and questioned your own roots. Do you understand how deep the wound is? This is not about attacking Christianity. It's about whether Africa has actually audited the spiritual package you received under violence, conquest, and humiliation. Because when a belief enters a people through ships, guns, chains, colonization, and cultural erasure, a serious mind doesn't simply kneel. A serious mind investigates. Who brought it? Why did they bring it? What did they destroy while bringing it? What did they gain after we accepted it? And why were Africans taught to despise their own spiritual memory while honoring the ancestors of other people's prophets? The Vatican's apology doesn't end the conversation. It opens the grave instead. And inside the grave are questions Africans have avoided for too long. If the cross came with conquests, if salvation arrived beside subjugation, then Africa must ask one terrifying question. Were we converted? Were we conditioned? If the answer hurts, it might be because the wound is finally speaking, because people can finally become so attached to a structure that questioning it becomes more offensive than confronting what it participated in. And that is why this moment matters, because this is bigger than religion. This is about whether Africa is ready to examine history honestly without emotional protection around beliefs. The Vatican has spoken. Now Africa must decide whether it is finally ready to think.
Pope Leo, born Robert Francis Prevost, is the first American pope in history. Right after he was elected, genealogists started digging into his family tree. They discovered a deep buried family secret. In the year 1900, the Pope's grandfather, Joseph Martinez, and his grandmother, Lois, were living in New Orleans. In the official government census records of that year, they were listed as black people. Joseph Martinez was actually from Haiti, the nation that famously fought and won the only successful slave revolution in human history against Napoleon's army. By 1910, Joseph and Lois decided to flee the dangers and segregation of the American South. They joined the Great Migration and moved north to Chicago. But when they arrived in Chicago, something shifted. In 1910 census and every census after that, they were listed as white. They had made a survival calculation. They chose to pass as white so their children could eat, work, and live safely. The strategy worked. Their granddaughter grew up passing as white, married, and had children. One of those children grew up to become the Pope. The family buried this history so deeply in silence that the Pope's own brother admitted they never once talked about their Creole ancestry. The truth only came to light recently when Harvard professor Henry Louis Gates Jr. traveled to the Vatican and handed the Pope a report tracing his family tree back 5 generations. The report proved the Pope has at least 17 Afro-Creole ancestors. It also showed the messy complexity of history. Some of his ancestors were enslaved, while others, after gaining their freedom, actually became slave owners themselves. Think about the ultimate irony. The man who now sits in the highest chair of the Vatican, the very institution that gave Europe the moral and legal cover to destroy black lives, is a man who carries black ancestry. He is apologizing for a system that his own ancestors had to hide their identities to survive. While this apology is historic, it highlights a massive gap between words and action. The Pope made the apology, but those original 15th century documents have still never been formally revoked by the Vatican. They are technically still on the books, and the rest of the world is still refusing to face this history. Just 2 months before the Pope's apology, on March 25, 2026, Ghana's President John Dramani Mahama stood up at the United Nations on behalf of the African Union. He brought forward a resolution to formally declare the transatlantic slave trade the gravest crime against humanity in world history. The vote was shocking. 123 countries voted yes, but 3 countries voted an absolute no. The United States, Israel, and Argentina, even worse, the entire European Union, including Portugal, the very country that used the Pope's permission to start the slave trade, refused to vote yes and chose to abstain. So, the Pope issued an apology, but the nations that built their global wealth on the backs of enslaved labor are still not even ready to call it a crime against humanity. This is why historians and leaders are saying that an apology without revoking the documents is just a press release. An apology without reparations from the wealthiest institutions on earth is just a headline. It is a beginning, but it is not the end. Interestingly, the Pope is not alone. A major shift is happening. Just 8 days before the Vatican spoke, the National Church of Scotland issued its own formal apology for historical ties to slavery, admitting that the church was built and ministers were trained using profits from the slave trade. The Church of England has also apologized and is facing pressure to put up €1 billion in funds to make things right. Something is moving in global history, but the most urgent part of the Pope's message isn't about the past, it's about right now. The Pope did not put this apology in a document about history. He hid it inside an official letter about artificial intelligence. He made a direct connection between the past and the present. He warned that the church's failure in 1452, which allowed the extraction of African bodies for labor, must be a warning for today. He pointed directly to the high-tech mines in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where children are mining cobalt under terrible conditions to create the AI chips, smartphones, and electric cars the world uses today. The Congo holds 70% of the world's cobalt. The Pope's warning was clear. The world cannot stay silent while a new version of the old colonial system is built. This time, it isn't using ships and chains. It is using algorithms and supply chains. The same continent is being exploited. The wealth is flowing out and the suffering is staying in. We are watching a massive global argument about true accountability. History moved this week, but truth without action is just a statement. The question the world must answer now is simple. What actually comes after sorry? We are the only ones that can set ourselves free. United we stand, divided we fall, and united we keep standing forever and ever. The greatest enemy of the African is mental slavery. So let's decolonize ourselves from mental slavery. Let's keep sharing to educate our brothers and sisters. Together we make Africa great for ourselves and the next generations that are going to come. So that's the latest around the world, in Europe and in Italy.